Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 92 of the podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and today I talk with Louie Lovoy of North Point Ministries. And Louie serves in a role at North Point where he helps take what they do for student ministry, for middle school and high school students, and export that to their strategic partner churches, who are churches that are similar to North Point in their mission, vision, and strategy, partner with North Point for resources. And so we talk basically about what does student ministry look like at North Point, but then how does that relate to these partner churches that are all different sizes and in all different parts of the country and even in other countries. This is one of those episodes where we just do a kind of a broad overview of what the student ministry looks like at North Point, with the hope that those of you that serve in middle school or high school ministry can think about your ministry and what might you want to do different, or what are they doing that you could learn from or tweak or adjust. So we don't go deep into one area of their ministry, really just hit an overview, but we certainly ask some questions along the way to figure out how they do what they do, including teaching content, trips and retreats, small group leaders, how that all works. So as usual, you can find the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 92. But let's go ahead now and just jump right into the conversation that I got to have with Louie Lovoy about how North Point does student ministry. Today I'm talking with Louie Lovoy. Louie, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Nick.
Yeah, you bet. Before we jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and your role at North Point, which we'll dive into even more. But yeah, give us an introduction.
Okay. Yeah, great. My name is Louie Lovoy, and my wife's name is Lindsay, and we've been married for 16 years. And we have two little boys, Levi, who is 7, and Luke, who had just turned 2. So we are busy. And I've been here at North Point for 7 years. The first 3 years, I was one of the middle school small group directors for Transit, which is the middle school ministry here at North Point. And then the last 4 years, I've worked in North Point Partners, helping to provide content and coaching and connection to our 70 partner churches around the country. And I work directly with all the middle school and high school directors at those partner churches.
All right. So we're going to talk all about student ministry at North Point, what's it look like, but especially from your perspective, working with partner churches. But before we do that, a lot of people aren't going to understand how North Point is set up, how it works. I mean, it's unique because it's kind of like a multi-site meets a network of thing. You know what I mean? So Could you just share, we've had Tom Shefchunas on the podcast before, so
yeah,
and others. So we have talked about it a little bit, but just give us the overview of how it all works. What is the system? How, what's the difference between a partner church and like a campus, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So we have 6 campuses in the Atlanta area, and those have common leadership and funding. And then we have 70 partner churches around the country, and those churches are separate in that they have their own individual local leadership and funding. The thing that connects us is that we provide content, coaching, and connection for those churches. So they use a lot of the things that our campus create as far as message series go, best practices, leader trainings. Even some of them use logos and artwork and loops and T-shirt designs. But most of all, it's just the philosophy that unites us. And my job is basically to help them understand what we do and why we do it that way, so that if they need to vary from that for a reason, they do so strategically and not just because they didn't know that we did something or didn't know why we did something the way we do it.
Yeah, and you said there's about 70 partners, 6 campuses. You work mostly with the partners.
Yes.
Although I guess you interact with the campuses too, because you're kind of
I do.
Back and forth. You're like air traffic controller.
Exactly. So during the week, I may sit in on some of I may sit on the high school directors meeting or the middle school directors meeting, or I may go to one of the campus's local middle school staff meeting or high school staff meeting just to stay connected to what's going on at the campuses. But then the rest of my week is lots of emails and phone calls with student directors from our partner churches around the country. And then the most fun part is that I get to actually get out, drive around, or hop a plane and travel and do about 12 to 14 site visits to our partner churches a year. So that's the fun part.
Yeah, that sounds fun. And you guys, do you still do events where you gather partners, like staff from partners that come together?
Yes.
Once or twice a year, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We do some. North Point puts on a conference every 2 years called Drive, and of course, we do a lot of special and unique things for our partners at things like that at Drive. But then we also, every ministry area, whether it's children's or students or adult ministries or adult service programming or so on, every ministry area also has its own ministry area retreat that happens once a year. So, for instance, in March, I'm gathering with about 20 of the student pastors from our strategic partner churches. And we're all gathering at one of our partner churches in Athens, Georgia, called Athens Church. And we're gathering there just to kind of have about 3 days of just workshop and learning and best practices and networking and observing environments there at Athens Church on Sundays and that kind of stuff. And we do that once a year as well for every ministry area.
That's great. So we're gonna talk about a number of different things related to student ministry, and your perspective as someone who works with the campuses and works with partners will be really helpful. But we'll start here with middle school. Mm-hmm. What is kind of the approach from a teaching standpoint, scope, cycle, content, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to teaching middle school students from North Point Ministries? And then we can get into how does that transition out to partner churches?
Okay, sure. Yeah, at the core of what our middle school ministry is, and high school ministry for that matter, it's really, for middle school, it's a 3-year spiritual mentorship program, basically. And for high school, it's 4 years, where the entire thing we're trying to accomplish is put two Jesus following adults in the life of every student in our ministry that will walk with them through from the beginning of 6th grade through the end of 8th grade. And so that's the number one thing we're trying to do. So we put a lot of emphasis on how we find those people and how we orient them to what we do. We have applications and interviews and small group leader agreements and, of course, criminal background checks and character references and all that. And then we staff to take care of those people and pastor them as they are leading students. So that's the number one thing we do. So in order to help them be the best small group leader that they can be and really be a positive influence for Jesus in the life of these students, we have a weekly service where we gather, and then we also have some annual camps that we do. So at this weekly service that we do for middle school, it's called Transit. And we meet once a week. All of our campuses right now, middle school ministries meet on Sundays during our adult services. So while the adults are in the adult service, middle school students are in another area of the building, and we do a large group, small group combination. And our adult services are around an hour and 5 minutes. And so that's what we have for middle school as well. So we break that down to about 40 minutes of large group and about 25 minutes of small group discussion. And so the content that we teach during that large group is really meant to just set up a great small group discussion. And so the kind of the scope and cycle of what we teach is actually very similar to what some of you may remember from the 7 Checkpoints, a book that Andy Stanley and Stuart Hall wrote several years ago. But it's a lot of those same things. What are the things that are most pertinent in the life of a middle school student? So we talk about wise choices. We talk about authority. We talk about authentic faith. We talk about moral boundaries. It's all those things from 7 Checkpoints. And then we usually we'll throw in a few different series throughout the year, like a series about Christmas during Christmas time, or maybe a series about investing in your friends and inviting your friends to church. But for the most part, it's very closely related to the 7 checkpoints.
Now, do you use the 7 checkpoints, which is a great book? You're right. It's been out for a long time. I know a lot of churches that have adapted that or just used it to be kind of their guide for content. Does that fit a calendar too? You know, not rigidly, but like, is it kind of like, well, we try to talk about all 7 of them in once in the 3 years, or twice, or, you know, I know you have some plan with that with retreats and trips, so we can talk about that in a minute, but like, how specific does the 7 checkpoints get used when it comes to the calendar? Or is it more just a guide? Like, oh, you know what? We haven't talked making wise choices in a while. We should probably do that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty much now we have the advantage since we've been around for so many years now, and middle school students are only in middle school for 3 years, that we can continue doing the same 3-year cycle of curriculum, basically the same 3 years of topics. And so, yeah, some of those that we hit every single year at strategic times. Like, for instance, in middle school, our sex and dating series, we always do that in late spring, kind of the end of the school year. So that's when we do every single year. There's usually a series about friendships every single year. There's usually a series about parents. And so there's definitely series that happen annually, and then some of those may only get hit once every 3 years or twice during the 3 years.
Now, real quick before we talk more about that, you have 6th grade. Well, I guess it's probably different in different churches, but at some North Point campuses, 6th grade is separate in terms of Sunday morning programming, or is it really all the same? It's just a different environment, just a different room.
I'm sorry. It's 6th through 8th grade that's separate. That's our middle school.
Okay, so it's all together. I wasn't sure if North Point still had like a sixth grade program only.
There was one several years ago. There was an environment that was created. I believe it was called Intermission, but that only lasted maybe 1 or 2 years, and then everything was put back together for middle school 6th through 8th grade.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I'm sure some folks listening do that, or maybe they do like a 5th, 6th, or like a 4th, 5th, or something like that.
Yeah, especially. Yeah, we have a partner church. We have a few partner churches out on the West Coast, and their school systems tend to go, instead of middle school and high school, they have junior high and senior high, and their junior high is usually 7th and 8th grade. And so a lot of those churches will do like a separate ministry for 4, 5, and 6 or something like that. But here, since our schools run middle school 6, 7, 8, and high school 9 through 12, that's the way we break up our 2 student ministries.
Yeah, we do that too. So you have the 3 years, and you're saying that you're at a point now where you do recycle a lot of the same content, ideas, concepts, knowing that those kids aren't going to see it again and haven't seen it before.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It really is like a 3-year plan, essentially, or at least
it is. It is, absolutely. So we, in most of the time, we will, look at the calendar of where we were 3 years ago and say, okay, it's time for our series about wise choices, our series about friendship, healthy friendships, our series about relating to your parents, and we'll look back over that content and those scripture verses that were used and those bottom lines that we taught. And sometimes we're like, yep, this is exactly what we want to say again. And sometimes we're like, whoa, this is way out of date. Let's change this. Let's use a different scripture passage to communicate that. Or this bottom line is not clear. Let's rewrite this in a way that is either more clear or more memorable. But we usually have something to start with. In most cases, we're not starting with a blank page anymore. Although we do vary from that. Like this past school year, this past August, we, for the first time, did an entire 3-week series that was all about bullying. It was called, "What Are You Going to Do About It?" And so that was one that we had not done before. And so that was one that was written from scratch. So that one may make its way back onto the rotation either on an annual basis or once during the 3-year period that a student's in middle school.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Now, Partner Church is part of being a partner with you, is they have access to a lot of the stuff that you do, correct? I mean, everything from graphics to the content for the teaching.
Yes, every partner church has access to graphics and things like that. But we have two different levels or categories of partner churches: network partners and strategic partners. And only the strategic partner churches have access to the weekly message series content for middle school and high school. But all of them have also access to XP3, which is the student curriculum from Orange, through our partnership with them.
Gotcha. Now, so because I know like with the service for adults, for instance, Andy does a series on something. I believe churches can buy that as a kit once it's done and use whatever they want. Maybe it's just the graphics. Maybe it's more than that. That same thing doesn't exist for middle school, high school, though, does it? It's not like another church that's not a network partner. Somebody that's listening right now could say, hey, because I know people are thinking, I would love that series on bullying. Can we get that series on bullying? You know what I mean? But is that how it works? I don't think that's how it works with your middle school, high school, or even children's stuff, is it?
It's not. As of right now, that's stuff that is only available for partner churches. Now, that's for middle school and high school. There is one middle school series and event curriculum or content that we make available to outside churches every year, and that's something that we call Double Dog Dare-a-thon. And it's a silly name, but it's a lot of fun that we do every April. It's a 3-week series about investing in your friends and inviting them to church. And then the 4th week is this fun, zany event called Double Dog Dare-a-thon that the students have a very easy way to invite their friends to that event as kind of the action point of application of that 3-week series they just heard about, Invest and Invite. And right now, that's the only one that's available out of all of our middle school and high school content. But I do think that our elementary content is made available to outside churches every year, unless that's just churches that come to drive. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. Now, if they wanted to get the Double Dog Dare-a-thon thing, how do they get that?
Yeah, there literally is a website called doubledogdareathon.org. And so have fun trying to spell that. So you don't put any hyphens in there. That's the best tip I can give you.
Nice. That's great. So let's talk high school for a little bit then. So how is it different? How's it similar in terms of like the scope and the sequence and content?
You know, the philosophy and the content is almost exactly the same. Again, instead of a 3-year relationship with a small group leader, it's a 4-year relationship. So most of our small group leaders start with a group of 9th grade students, and they walk with that group all the way through the end of 12th grade. And so that's why we try to put 2 adult leaders in every group to co-lead that group together, because that's a long haul. That's a big commitment to make. But, you know, the way we talk about it is that you, instead of, you know, the church I grew up in, you would be in somebody's group or class for 1 year, and then at the end of the school year, you'd move up to another class. And that was really hard on the teachers or the leaders, because once they kind of broke down all the relational walls with those students and were ready to then dig in and do life with them, it was time for them to move on to another group. So basically, we look at it the opposite way. Instead of, hey, you have to do this for 4 years, we look at it as, hey, you get to stay with your same group through the entire time there in high school. We're not going to rip that group away from you and give them to another leader. So that's the same philosophy we have for middle school and high school is adults pouring their lives into students. And then the same thing for high school. They have one weekly meeting. For most of our campuses, it happens at 4:30 on Sundays. One of our campuses, they are in a setup tear down situation, so they don't have access to their building on Sunday afternoon. So they do theirs during their second service, adult service, on Sunday mornings. So they have high school has a weekly meeting called Inside Out. That's, again, a large group, small group combination. About the first 45 minutes are large group, and about the last 45 minutes are small group discussion. And again, the content is all built around the things that are most applicable to the lives of high school students. And so it follows very closely to the ideas behind outlined in the book 7 Checkpoints, with a few variations in there. And then they also have 3 annual camps that kind of support those relationships throughout the year as well.
What are the camps? Let's talk about that for a little bit. What are the trips, retreats, the camps, even middle school and high school? And what, like, because you said some of them have a specific focus in terms of content.
Sure.
What is that focus?
Yeah, I would say the first one is probably the most important one. We do a camp, usually the third or fourth weekend in August, which is for us, that's 2 to 3 weeks after school starts. So we have it strategically placed there. And it's for sixth grade only. It's called boot camp. And that camp is a 2-night overnight. It's a Friday night, through Sunday morning camp. And the whole point of that camp is to have those brand new sixth grade groups that just launched that are going to go on a 3-year journey together. It's to build as many initial, memories and bonding moments as possible, for those students, to create what we call a shared quality experience for those small group leaders and those students to have together. And we build it all around biblical truth. So, at sixth grade boot camp, the content is all based around what we call the 3 vital relationships, which is intimacy with God, community with insiders, and influence with outsiders. Now, that's internal language. We don't say that to our middle school students, but that's literally what we teach them during the sessions, is how to have a relationship with God through, trusting in Jesus as their Lord and Savior, and then how to, over these next 3 years of middle school, to lean into that community of their small group and that relationship they have with their small group leader. And then also to be an influence to other students in their school and neighborhood and sports teams and dance teams or theater groups or whatever it may be.
That's great. How about other trips and retreats?
Yeah.
What do they look like? How do they fit into the plan and the scope and the cycle?
Sure. So then we have a camp that's just for 7th and 8th grade students. It's called Frequency. And the idea, let me tell you this. We have the other 2 camps in the middle school calendar besides boot camp are Frequency for 7th and 8th graders. And then in the fall, and then in the spring, there's one called Walking Wisely Weekend. And that's for 6th through 8th grade. And so the way those 2 break down is the fall camp Frequency is what we call a vertical camp. And the one in the spring is what we call a horizontal camp. So the vertical camp in the fall, called Frequency, is all about your relationship with God. So, and students are only in there for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade. So it kind of goes back and forth. Some years it's about worship. Some years it's about the secrets that we're keeping from God and things like that. And so it's a camp that's all about a relationship with God, whereas the camp that we do in the spring, Walking Wisely Weekend, is a horizontal camp, meaning it's all about others and yourself. So that camp, 1 year may be about making wise choices. The next year it may be about healthy friendships. The next year it might be growing your character. And so that's that cycle that we do in middle school. So a middle school student will go to boot camp and Walking Wisely their 6th grade year. Then they'll go to Frequency and Walking Wisely their 7th and 8th grade year.
Okay. That's good. What
and
about
all of our middle school camps are weekend camps. So they're all just Friday night and Saturday night. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, we want to have 100% attendance by our small group leaders. That's the whole reason we do camp. So many times people are asking me, so do you guys ask your small group leaders to go to camp? And we're like, yeah, the entire reason we do the camp is to build lasting memories and bonding moments for our small group leaders to have with their students. And so that's exactly why we do those camps on the weekend, so that all or almost all of our leaders can be there.
And there isn't a summer trip in middle school, correct?
No, we do not do a summer trip for middle school. Used to several years ago. That is when we did boot camp. We promote from elementary to middle school ministry at the 1st of June, right when school gets out. And so we used to do boot camp, that 6th grade boot camp, in June, a few weeks after they promoted. And our participation was not great. And then that's when we made the decision to move it to August, a few weeks after school starts. And our participation has gone through the roof, probably doubled. And so we think that's for several reasons. One, you're not competing against summer vacations. Everybody's more into a rhythm once school is back in session. But then also, those students were just 5th graders a few weeks ago. So sometimes they're afraid to go away overnight to a camp. Sometimes their parents are afraid to let them go away overnight. They haven't really met their small group leaders yet. They don't really know anybody in their small group. And so there wasn't much positive peer pressure to go to the camp. Whereas now we launched those groups in June, and they have, 8 weeks or so of getting to know their leaders, getting to know their group. School's back in session. They can invite their friends. They're actually sixth graders at that point because school started. And so the participation for that camp has gone way up. So for right now, we don't do anything during June and July.
Okay. And then what about high school? What's the plan there, and what's the content that fits with the retreats and trips?
Yeah. So very similar. High school has a fall camp and a spring camp as well. Their fall camp is called Vertical Reality, and it's their vertical camp. And their spring camp or winter, wherever you want to count February, spring semester, is called My Life, and it's their horizontal camp. So at Vertical Reality in the fall, they teach content that has to do directly with your relationship with God, and it's on a 4-year rotation. And then their February camp, My Life, has to do horizontal things like your friendships, even sometimes dating relationships, your own character, those kinds of things. And then they do add a third camp that meets in the summer. They have a 5-day beach camp called The Walk that happens every June. And that one is always literally talking about Jesus and the difference he can make in your life. And so that camp is done right after promotion. They promote from middle school to high school the 1st of June, and then launch their 9th grade groups. And 3 weeks later, they're at the beach at the Walk. And they have good participation with that, a lot better than we had at boot camp, because those students have already been to camp a lot of times, many times. So there's no hesitation there. They can't wait. They've been looking forward to going to high school, and they've been looking forward to go to this beach camp in the summer that they have not been able to go to the entire time they're in middle school. So that's another reason why we advise a lot of our partner churches not to take all your students to every camp. Save some things for high school so that middle school students have something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd love to talk high school specifically a little bit, because I don't know if you hear this, but when I talk with student ministry leaders around the country, a common theme is, hey, middle school's doing pretty well, but high school not so much. It's more of a struggle. The same things aren't working. It's challenging, and some of it is, you and I were talking before we recorded, some of it is the drop off in participation between 9th and 12th, but some of it feels bigger than that. Like the whole ministry feels like it's harder now than it was 5 years ago or whatever. I've even seen, I don't know if you're familiar with Tony Morgan, but his organization, works with churches to help them get unstuck, and they have an assessment that churches fill out. And every quarter now they started releasing kind of the results from the assessment. And the first quarter they released it, which was last year, student ministry was on average 9% of the overall church, attendance. And that was down from their previous years of doing that survey, which used to be 10%, which is kind of like usually the common standard people try to aim for. And
sure.
then this quarter dropped even more. I think it's like 8.5%. So I feel like that, and just conversations with other people, it feels like student ministry is just getting more difficult to do well, and obviously some of it could just be we need to change what is success. But in terms of high school ministry at North Point campuses, at these partners, how's it going? What are the challenges you're seeing there? What's working well? Give us some insight on what high school ministry looks like, and what the momentum is like right now.
Sure. It seems to be going very well with the common struggle of the upper grades once students have their driver's license, and then especially senior year once students start turning their eyes toward college. But there's definitely lots of positive momentum. We just came off 2 weekends of My Life, which is our high school camp they do in February, and those were outstanding. Lots of participation, lots of students that invited friends that don't go to church to come and be a part of that weekend and experience what it's like to be in a small group and have a small group leader and hear some great content. And so I'd say we put all of our eggs in the one basket, and that's the basket of small group leaders. So our student ministry rises and falls on the quality of our small group leaders. So we put tons of energy and effort and staffing into finding great small group leaders that for us really are the student pastors of our ministry. We give over all of the relational, I wouldn't say all, we give over the vast majority of the relational connection with our students to our small group leaders. Those are the people that know all the names of their students and what schools they go to and what sports or activities they're into, and whether or not their parents are married, and whether or not they have brothers and sisters, and where they're hoping to go to college, or if they're hoping to go to college, or where they are spiritually, and if they've made a decision to trust Jesus as their Lord and Savior, if they've taken that step to be baptized, if they've gone on one of our Global X mission trips, if they're serving on Sunday mornings in children's ministry, or if they're being an influence in their students' lives. Our small group leaders really are the ones that know all that and lean into that and are building relationships with the students. And so for us, we have, relatively large numbers of students involved in our overall student ministry, but we really look at it as little separate youth groups that we call small groups. And the ones that have incredible leaders that really do a great job pouring into their students and building relationships with them, and not only them, but their parents, those are the ones that thrive and grow over the 4 years, and not only numerically, but spiritually and involvement, engagement, things like that. And then the ones that have weaker leaders that either don't put in the effort, or don't have the time, or don't make the time, or either don't frankly have what it takes to connect relationships with students and their parents, those are the ones that we see stagnate or dwindle. So you could do, you could take our entire student ministry as a laboratory and see that, and say, is it growing? Is it working? And I'm like, I don't know. It depends on which small group you're asking about. So that's pretty much what it comes down to, is the quality of our small group leaders. So one of our mantras that we're always talking about is more and better leaders, more and better leaders, more and better leaders. That's really what it comes down to. Having more leaders so that our span of care per leader to student is that ratio is manageable, but then better leaders, that it's not just somebody there, a warm body there to keep the ratios low, that's a person that's actually leading those students into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And so to answer your question, it really just comes down to the quality of the small group leaders that are pouring into the lives of the students.
Now, what does this, and maybe it's just high school, but maybe we could even expand it back to talk all of student ministry. What does this look like, or how is it different when you work, or, working with churches that have 30 students, and then some that might have 300, or some at North Point could even be 3,000, if you added up a few campuses or whatever. So,
sure.
Yeah, what's like, do you hear that like the partners churches are doing well with student ministry and they're running this model? Are there unique challenges, when they're smaller or larger, that they're having to navigate? What do you see there?
Yeah, to me, the thing that is the hardest thing to create is just the culture and the longevity. So we have a huge advantage of the fact that North Point Ministries and its campuses have been around now for 22, 23 years. And so for that reason, the students that are involved in our student ministry, a lot of them have been involved in small groups their entire lives if they grew up at our campuses. So then you're only, introducing their friends that they invite to the concept. Whereas and same thing with small group leaders, people in our churches, they get what it means to be a small group leader, and the people in their small group, their adult small groups have led student small groups before. And there's such a culture of so many people leading student small groups and doing that for 3 years of middle school or 4 years of high school, that there's just a culture created where it's being a small group leader for one of our student ministries is something that is admired and respected in the life of our church. And so we have very high level people that are, successful at what they do in business or some other aspect of life. And yet they are basically volunteering for us as a small group leader, which is basically I guess you could call it, what's the word I'm trying to think of? A bivocational student pastor. I mean, they have their day job, but for all intents and purposes, they are leading a youth group. And so that culture has been in place for years here. So it's kind of like that momentum is already rolling and been rolling for a long time. What I see from our partner churches is the struggle of getting that culture off the ground in place, that inertia of the ball is just sitting there and somebody's got to start the ball rolling and talk enough vision and teach their leaders through the 5 essentials of the book Lead Small, if you're familiar with that. And that's all new to them. That's the biggest difference. Whether you're a small church or a large church, it's getting that momentum going.
So North Point has been doing it for a long time. There's the culture there, like you said, and these other folks, it's just a hard time getting it started, getting the ball rolling. What, have you been able to observe a church getting it done? Does it take them 2 years? Does it take them 6 months? Does it take them 4 years? You know what I mean? This is all probably not what we plan to talk about, but I think it's good to hear, what did they do? Like, what are the things they had to go to work on to go? Because I'm sure people listening are thinking, yeah, we don't have that culture right now, but I'm working towards that. How do you do it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the first church that comes to mind is a church we have partner church we have in Austin, Texas. It's literally called North Point, Austin. And when I first started going out there 4 years ago, when I first started this role, they would have 20 or 30 students in their middle school service and 20 or 30 students in their high school service, and they just kept going, kept working it. They kept finding and recruiting and training more and better small group leaders that were just giving their lives away to these students in a very real way and leading them into a growing relationship with Jesus. And they just kept on doing their weekly services, and making it better week in, week out, evaluating it, trying to make it more engaging, create a better experience for small groups to experience from start to finish. A lot of times we think of small group as just the end of the service when we break up and have a discussion, but really it's the way that you program your entire weekly program. The small groups are having shared quality experiences from the beginning, the pre-service time, whether that's music playing and games and hang time and snacks and food and drinks and things like that, all the way through, hosting and games and funny videos that you're doing as small groups to help them bond, all the way through either worshiping together or some other form of turning your attention toward God, to listening to a relevant, applicable talk that students can take with them that explains the truth of the Bible in a very real way. Then having a discussion. That's not the first time you're in small group or you're experiencing the day or the night as your small group. That's just the time you've set aside to discuss and apply that truth to your life that you just heard in the talk in large group. So they just continue to make that time more strategic and quality over the years. And then they have an annual camp calendar that they have continued to make more robust and more strategic and more meaningful through the years. And I've seen that church go from 20 or 30 in a middle school service and 20 or 30 in high school service to now they had over 200 in their high school ministry this past fall. And there was nothing really, there's no silver bullet. There's nothing like, oh, once they did this, then everything changed. They just kept on focusing on small group leaders, their weekly program and their annual camps to bolster those relationships that students have with their small group leaders.
That's good. And how long did you say it took? A couple of years for them to?
Yeah, that was about. It's been about 4 years now.
That's good.
That's the other thing, just patience. So many times people next semester we're going to double or quadruple in size, and it really, you've got to have. It kind of works with your whole church working together, from a strong elementary ministry that's promoting students into your middle school ministry, a strong middle school ministry that's promoting students into your high school ministry. And so it really is amazing how it all works together.
Yeah, I've said this before, I'm sure, on this podcast, but I feel like one of the things I've observed over the years with student ministry is that consistency is one of the best things that you can have in place to build momentum. That it may not, and it might be different for different churches. Like one church might gather on a Wednesday night, one might do Sunday night, one might do it this exact format, one might do it another format. But it's the consistency over time and the patience to let it get there. Yes, is when you finally reap the benefits. It usually, at least in student ministry world, there's not a lot of 6-month turnarounds. You know what I mean?
I totally agree.
I've seen that in
consistency,
children's
so that even students, that have older brothers and sisters, they are excited about what they're doing, and it doesn't change before the time that their younger siblings get there. They can expect it. And just so that you can invite your friends. If something is consistently good, consistently at the same time, then somebody's going to be more likely to invite their friend because they trust it. They trust that if I bring my friend that doesn't go to church, they are going to be welcomed. They're going to feel comfortable. There's going to be music playing that they're familiar with. There's going to be games there that they like to play. There's going to be videos or games that are funny that make anybody laugh, no matter what you believe about Jesus yet. But then not only that, there is going to be a point in the service where they are going to connect and encounter God, maybe for the first time. They're going to connect and encounter the truth of God's word that they never knew could be so real and relevant and applicable to their lives. And so by consistency, you build that trust with your students. If everything's changing all the time, then students, no wonder they're not going to invite their friends. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if it's going to be a positive experience for their friend or not. And then the same thing goes with camps. North Point campuses have done the same camps the same way for years. Now, obviously, we make incremental changes to make it better and tweak things and continually make it easier for parents and leaders and students. But they're very consistent in the time of year they are, the format that they're in. So same reason, students know they can invite their friends because they know what to expect. And then also, students, children that are younger in elementary school or middle school, they are looking forward to those camps, and they know that we're going to be doing that same camp when they get there.
That's a really good point. Just the consistency over time, like you're saying, and that students look forward to stuff. I mean, that absolutely happens. You're doing the same thing in high school for all those years, while all the middle schoolers, especially the ones with older siblings, are like, they can't wait for the beach week.
Sure.
And that makes a lot of sense.
Well, sometimes I talk to people about their camp, and they're like disappointed in the students that have signed up for their camp. And I'm like, well, this is the first year you've ever done this camp. Nobody even knows if it's any good. I mean, the parents don't know what's going to happen. Are all their kids going to make it back safely? The students don't know if it's going to be any fun. They're not inviting anybody, something they've never gone to before. But, when you get to a point where we have the luxury of where students and parents are familiar with camps, heard the names multiple times. Even the students have been to it once or twice or sometimes 3 times. They know exactly what to expect. I guarantee you they're going to sign up as soon as registration starts. They know exactly what it's going to be like. They're going to invite every friend that they can get from their baseball team to go to it because they know it, they trust it, it's familiar, and they know it's going to be a great weekend.
That's good. Well, how about we wrap up with this question, although I'll have, I guess, one quick one right after that. But where, and maybe you've already said it and you'll just point back to it, but what aspect of student ministry has the most momentum right now? And maybe that's kind of overall when you look at all the partner churches, maybe it's just a specific one and you're going to give that to us. Like, where, with that whole plan that we've basically just talked about, where are you experiencing the most momentum?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that it is with the camp calendar. And the camp participation. And it kind of goes back to the last answer I was just giving, of just kind of making a plan and then working that plan over and over, year after year after year after year, so that leaders and parents and students are familiar with what's going to happen throughout the course of the year. And they go to the same camps, a few times in a row, so that they know what to expect. But then it's also that balance but there are changes from 6th grade to 7th and 8th grade to 9th through 12th grade. So that it's not going to the same camp 6th through 12th grade, because they would drop out after the 4th or 5th time going there. So it's that walking that line of something being consistent and familiar, but also having some progression throughout their time as they start as a 6th grader in middle school to finishing as a 12th grader in high school. So right now, like I said, we just came off our 2 weekends of our high school camp called My Life, and we're going into our middle school camp called Walking Wisely Weekend. And there's just great momentum for those weekends, and leaders and students look forward to those weekends. Parents know their students are going to go and bond with their small group leaders and learn some amazing truths from God's word that they can then apply to their everyday lives. So I would have to say just that camp strategy that happens on an annual basis for middle school and high school.
Okay. I said I only had one other quick question, but I guess I lied, because while you were saying that, I thought I want to ask one more thing. So for these partner churches, they're learning, how you do it, what the plan is, the content, all that stuff. When it comes to like trips, for instance, I mean, this could apply to anything. It could apply to the weekly program for students, but with trips and retreats, obviously I imagine they're getting content for like what you talk about, series, graphics, whatever. But how much do you give them like a playbook? You know what I mean? Think of like a franchise, like you open up a Chick-fil-A or something. Like there are just hundreds of documented systems of like, here's what we do, and we start promoting here, and we sign up then, and we plan this way. And like, is that the kind of thing that partner churches get as well? Or is it more like, let me just give you some guidance, some principles, and they kind of run it, they're on their own?
It's both. There's definitely guidance and principles of which camps we do, what the content of that camp is, what the purpose of that camp is, why we do it at that part of the year, which grades get to go to that camp and why, all of that. But then it's also very practical, and that we kind of open up the vault and they get the content that we did at those camps, whether that's the title packages and other funny videos that were shown throughout the camp, and the leader booklet that had all of the small group lessons and all the schedules and all the what to bring and what not to bring and the do's and don'ts, and the conversations that prepare leaders for having spiritual conversations with students around salvation and baptism, to even checklists that our logistics coordinators use to project manage the camp, from the time it goes on the calendar to registration, opening, closing, to recruiting a work crew or host homes or transportation, all the way through the camp. So yeah, it gets very practical as they want to get down into the weeds.
That's great. And I probably speak on behalf of everyone listening when I say you guys got to find a way to get that in the hands of other ministry leaders who just want to use it as a guide. You know what I mean? Like that would be such an amazing resource. And I've seen there are similar folks have created similar resources, more probably generic, to help with some of these kinds of things. But that'd be really cool to have that, even if it was just, hey, here's what we do. Or if it turned into more of a general thing, like here's a checklist for a general, planning a trip or retreat, like that would be really helpful. I don't know that you guys have the InsideNorthPoint.org website, I think, still, and I don't know how much is on there with student ministry, but that's something I'm sure people would love to get their hands on, whether they had to pay or not. It would be worth it. It sounds like
absolutely
it's a really well-developed system. So talk to whoever, pull some strings. Yeah, go talk to Andy. Go talk to Andy or something. Get him to.
Dude, as soon as we hang up, I'll head right down to his office.
That sounds that's what I thought.
So another thing is the Drive conference that we do every other year. I know at the last one we did last May, Britt Kitchen, our multi-campus middle school director, he did a breakout on this exactly called Big Event, Small Details. And he walked through that camp strategy and all the way down to the very practical ways that we plan and project manage those camps. And so I know, that kind of content is available, and the resources that he made available to that are out there as well.
That's great. Well, yeah, people would love that for sure. And I know the Drive conference isn't happening this year, right? It's next year.
Correct. This year, we do a conference called Regroup, which is specifically about small groups, and probably more specifically in adult ministry. So adult ministry small groups. So we kind of alternate those. So we do Drive one year, Regroup the next, and then so on.
That's great. And I highly recommend it. I've been twice, I think, which is not nearly enough. But my favorite part about it is that it's very like in the weeds, ground level. It's a mix. I mean, obviously the main sessions are more vision and principles and all that, but you get into the breakouts and you get the practical stuff you just mentioned. I went there years ago as a children's pastor. It was a decade ago now. And, I didn't know much about preschool ministry, even though that was part of what I had been leading for a few years. But I thought I should learn more about that. So I was just in some of the preschool breakouts. It was me and mostly other women, but I asked all kind of crazy questions that were very detailed, and like, how do you do this, and what does that look like? It's kind of questions I ask on this podcast, actually. But it was great to just be in that environment. And in that case, I don't know if it's always like that, but in that case, we actually even, I was around other leaders from the churches too, so I could hear what they did. So I got to, you all share what you do, and then there'd be conversations about what other churches do. So I love that combination of like, here are some principles, here's exactly what we do, and then you can take or leave whatever you want. But you have the opportunity to get real specific answers,
Sure, because there's variations on everything. So our partner churches take what we do and why we do it, and then a lot of times they create other ways they accomplish those same things, either for budget reasons or critical mass reasons. So some of them have middle school and high school combined for their weekly services. Some of them are separate for their weekly services, but then they'll do some of their camps combined, middle school and high school. So there's lots of different ways to accomplish the same thing that we're all trying to accomplish, which is to lead students into a growing relationship with Jesus.
That's great. So thank you so much for taking this time. Before we jump off here, how can people connect with you if they have a question or want to follow up or something like that?
Oh, gosh. Let's see. Email address is louie.lovoy. That's Lovoy at northpoint.org. And you can also find me on all the social media stuff. I'm pretty boring, whereas I'm pretty much, I think it's just Louie Lovoy on Twitter and at Louie Lovoy on Instagram. I'd be happy to connect with anybody there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for giving us this overview of like student ministry at North Point, but also at partnership churches and kind of the why behind what you do. I think some people will hear it and think that's a pretty simplified process, but I think that's the power in it, Yes. It's not simple behind the scenes, I'm sure. Just pulling off one of those trips is probably really complicated, but just the overall strategy is very simple. Small groups, retreats throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to clarify, the way we say it is four things: leaders, culture, program, parents. That's really the simplicity. So leaders is we provide exceptional small group leaders for every student. Culture is we want to provide a culture where leaders are inspired and valued and equipped to grow and lead. And then programs is we want to create shared quality experiences built around biblical truth. That's our weekly program as well as our annual camp programs. And then parents is we just want to find as many ways as possible for parents to be able to leverage our ministry. And so, I think that's probably the key is just the simplicity of it all.
That's great. Well, thanks again for taking the time to share with us. I really appreciate it, and it was helpful to get that perspective and even dive in deeper in a couple areas. It was really good. Thanks, Louie.
Sure. Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me.
I enjoyed learning more about how North Point does student ministry. I have known for some time about how they do ministry. I can't even begin to state the influence that North Point has had on me as a leader in my philosophy of ministry, how I approach ministry. And I think one of the biggest things is I just love the simplicity. I love the focus. I think focus is powerful, and I see that all throughout their church and their model and how they do church. But we saw it here in their student ministry as well. It wasn't like they're doing 50 things. They're doing a handful of things. They're doing really, really well, and they're leaning in on those things to really drive the ministry. Now, we didn't get to do a deep dive into how they run their weekly programming, like what that looks like. And I know from experience they do that really well. So the teaching, music, games, fun, the environment, all of that is excellent. And that certainly is part of what fuels their growth. But behind that, you have these small groups and their trips and retreats, the content plan, all of that. So coming out of there, some action items I thought about are, what if you asked yourself this question and answered it? What would I do differently if I viewed our student ministry as a bunch of small churches, small groups? What if it was based on small groups, and what if I led it and treated it like it was a bunch of small churches? What would I do differently? Another action item would be to read the book 7 Checkpoints for Student Ministry Leaders, if you haven't read that, and then create your content plan. What are the key things that you want a middle schooler to learn from 6th to 8th grade or high school or from 9th to 12th? Like, come up with your own plan and use that as you plan series and content and teaching. And then another action item would be to evaluate your retreat and trip plan in light of overall what you want to do for students. How does that work in with it? Obviously, theirs works in closely with the content they're trying to teach students while they're in middle school or high school. How does that work in your church? Is that something you should evaluate, change? Is there opportunity for improvement there? What might you do? You can get all the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 92. I hope this was helpful for you. I know for me, I just love hearing how other churches do ministry, what that looks like, and it always makes me go back and think about what we do and what we could tweak or change or improve or anything like that. So one thing I'd love to ask from you, if there's somebody that you would love to have interviewed on this podcast, or you've read something they've written or you've heard about their ministry or something they're doing, email me. Let me know what that is. Nick@nickblevins.com. Just email me. Let me know what it is. I'd love to reach out to them and maybe get them to come on the podcast so we could learn all about what they're doing. So I'd love to hear from you about who you would love to hear from on the podcast. I appreciate that. As usual, thanks for listening. Thanks for commenting, leaving ratings on iTunes, sharing it, all of that. I appreciate it. Thanks. Hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.